Welcome everyone, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you. Today we're going to be taking a look at Comet Lake 10900K and 10600K. So the new i7 and the i5, the new i9 and the i5. The i9, as I'm probably sure that you're all aware now, has 10 cores and 20 threads. And with the i5, what they've done is rather than it being a 6-core, 6-thread, it's now 6 cores with hyper-threading, so 6 cores and 12 threads. Now, prices, fairly expensive. We are getting easily on overclockers and kind of scan over the £500 mark for a retail version. Some can slip below the £500 mark for a OEM, which basically means a tray CPU, which normally means that someone like APAC has been through and picked all the best ones out, and then the OEM ones are the ones that are just fairly average. Then the i5, you're looking at around the £275 mark for a 6-core and 6-thread. Now the motherboards, it's a new socket as well. So we have a lot to talk about, and I do mean an awful lot to talk about, and it is going to be an awful lot of kind of brain farting out all this information because there is so much to go over. So yes, so much to go over, so get comfy. Hope you've got yourself a cup of tea now you've seen the intro. There is a lot that I need to talk about, and I want to try and stay fairly balanced. I do have an opinion about this, so if you are of the AMD side of the fence and I start saying some nice things, don't get too upset. Just wait for the balance, because I have info on kind of both sides and I do have a lot to get across. So new socket, LGA 1200. Official Intel stance, uprated power and support for future I/O. So we're straight into PCI Express 4 and the lack of it, because there has been a lot of speculation. There was a lovely online briefing where a lot of the very well-known reviewers were in the chat, and it was quite comical because we were all asking about PCI Express 4 and Intel just ignored every single question about it. There is no PCI Express 4 support because it's not on the processor. So if you remember back when I was testing the new Ryzen 3000 series, that was the first set of processors from AMD with PCI Express 4. I then took that processor and put it in the X470 and the X370 boards. There's a big review on it online, and they all got nigh on. I think it was only the X370 which lost a little bit of performance, but the X470 was perfectly capable of PCI Express 4 before AMD made the motherboard manufacturers turn it off. So with these boards, and I have tested both the ROG Rampage Extreme, which is the test kit today. I'll talk to you about the test kit, 4000 megahertz Corsair LPX. We have a H150i in the roof with 3 ML 120 fans. There's an AX1600i in the bottom of this as well. I mean, with the fact that all of the boards had like VRMs that were built bigger than 8-pack, it made me wonder whether the processors were going to just drink loads and loads of power. RTX 2080 Ti, again, this fits in with all of the testing that I did for X570, and we retested all of our processors then. And then I'm using Samsung 970 Pro, which is PCI Express 3 for the operating system. But then I used the PCI Express 4, which just so happens to be a Patriot Viper PCI Express 4 drive, so that I could do some PCI Express 4 tests, or at least to see whether I could get it. And they both come in at about 3,500 megabit. Now, I know this hard drive is capable of a lot more, so it's basically coming at PCI Express 3 speeds because that's what the processor supported. I did hope that in some mean, like janked up kind of way, that they might have squeezed more PCI Express, because obviously with an NVMe slot, it's 4 PCI Express lanes, and when you go up to PCI Express 4, because it's got more bandwidth, that's where the extra speeds come from. So it would have been nice if maybe that they'd like janked 2 or maybe 4 extra PCI Express 3 lanes onto it so that it could have like maybe had some more bandwidth, but it's not, doesn't do it. Okay, so the other thing, new socket. We've just said that it was increased power and then future I/O. So future I/O makes you kind of think to yourself that, well, there straight away we're going to be getting PCI Express 4 next time when they bring out the new processors, because it's not ready now, which is a bit of a shame. Makes you wonder why there's a new socket, because uprated power. Did it particularly need it? Not really. Not in the grand scheme of things. Yes, they do use more power than before, but I don't particularly see that there was a need for it there. Cooling wise, I was expecting it to be worse than it was. It wasn't brilliant considering I'm using a 360mm AIO, but it wasn't diabolical either. When you overclock, if you're going to just let the motherboard do the voltages on its own, obviously your experience is going to be different from board to board and more importantly from brand to brand. I always go in and set manual voltages and do it the old school way where I look for an overclock so that all the cores are the same speed, and then you run it as quick as you possibly can do at a fixed voltage. And I was able to get all the cores running at 5.2 at around 1.3 volts, depending on the board. Sometimes, so with the Rampage, for example, it could be around 1.28, depending on the load that you're going to put on. And then with the Gigabyte, that needed a little bit more volts. It was around 1.325 to be able to do it. Now, it depends on whether you're using AVX load or not. If it's a dedicated AVX load, then the processors do get hot, but it kind of ignites a separate part in the processor, which turns on to help do the AVX load. And that's another reason why they start using more power at that point as well. And it's something that the AMDs don't do. So they don't actually, the AMD ones don't actually do the AVX stuff as well as the Intel ones. But then because of all this extra heat and power, that's why there's an AVX offset in the BIOS. And in reality, if I'm going to do an overclock and I was going to do it for home and use it, I probably would just knock on a -2 AVX offset at that point, just because then it keeps it stable, keeps the heat down that little bit more. And if you're wondering about AVX load, most of Blender is, or Blender does use AVX. Cinebench 20 does as well. If you download Prime, if you're going to download the most up-to-date version of Prime, there are different versions of AVX in that, and you can actually disable them as well. There are lots of ways that you can trip it up, and a lot of games are now starting to use AVX as well. Obviously not 100% CPU AVX load, going to make it cripple and like practically melt itself to pieces, but it is there. What they have done with the processors though is they've actually made the IHS, which is the metal bit at the top of the processor, they've actually made that a bit thicker and it's more copper. And then what they've done underneath that is they've actually made the silicon on top of the substrate thinner. And it does seem to have helped because like I said, this was easier to cool a 10 core than it was with a massive overclock on the original 9900K, for example. So I think they've done a fairly good job there. They've definitely refined the process. But then again, they have been making these for an awful long time, because when I say they've been making them for an awful long time, we are still on 14 nanometer with these as well. It wouldn't be too much of, and you can see me smiling because I've been so much looking forward to this. They do run a bit quicker, and I am going to talk to you about boost in depth. But in reality, the i9 is like the 9900K plus 2. The i7 is the 9900K V2, and the i5 is the 9900K minus 2. Now, clock speeds. There's, honest to God, the clock speed side of things has been incredibly complicated this week, and it has been, that side of it's probably been my worst experience with a launch to date, because when Intel say, oh yeah, you're going to get single and dual up to about 5.3 as long as you keep your processor cool, when my processor's running at 50 degrees and I'm still like barely seeing 5.3 gigahertz, which I should be, what's going wrong? and there was lots of questions, and is it this board's fault? Is it that board's fault? And what it ended up turning out being is that the motherboard manufacturers had gone to the Intel white paper to the letter, and the 5.3 flick up was just such a split second. It was never ever a consistent 5.3. Even if you were running a single threaded benchmark, it wasn't latching onto a core properly and running it at 5.3. So the clock speed still moved around an awful lot, and that had an impact in performance. And at the tail end of last week, there was a load of BIOS updates come out, and Intel have now, something that they are saying was always in their kind of like kit to the vendors, but they've now said that vendors can change the P states, and they can add volts and power and boost lengths and even boost frequencies as they wish. And there's no it must be like this. They don't particularly care. So something that you are going to be seeing over the next few weeks and maybe into the next month is there are going to be a frequent and what's the word I'm looking for now? I can't get it out. It's definitely FAR. Frantic. There we go. Pop. It's going to be frantic BIOS updates, because the BIOS that is now on this Asus board compared to the one that was launched last week. So I'm on 0509 with this one at the moment. That's the one I did my testing with as well. Is night and day different. The amount of 5.3 boost that you can see is considerably better than it was a week ago. Now, it is a new platform, but all of the motherboard manufacturers have had obviously a long time with it because there was a delay. And I'd probably say that I'm most impressed over this launch period in reality, not trying to start wars or anything, but with MSI, because the amount of stuff that they've done without having to be shouted about, and BIOSes have just been arriving, and the whole range has been done, and it works, and the scores are good. It's just happened really quickly, and they've been responding really well as well. My experience with Gigabyte, for example, was much worse. Asus, I think they were and chatting to Intel a lot about the legal side of it, and this is what you wanted us to do, and then Intel was like, well, yeah, that is kind of like the baseline of the white paper, but you can also, there's some free reign there as well, so if you want to go and do other stuff, then you can do. And that's why I think that the BIOS is going to change a lot, because the moment that one manufacturer starts getting you 5.3 much more consistently, then the other ones are all going to start copying as well, because then one brand is going to start reviewing better than the other brand. So at this present moment in time, a lot of these performance reviews can be taken with a pinch of salt, because the BIOS is going to make them all better at stock. But the thing that you need to remember is, if you are planning on a manual overclock, or at least a manual intervention to change the possible cores, because you can change just the boost as well. So you can leave your single and dual threads at 5.3, and then if you wanted to, you could smash the rest out at 5.1, so that then the moment that you get any multi-core load on it, they're all going to run at 5.1 anyway. So, and that's all stuff that you can do in the BIOS. You can also turn hyper-threading on and off per core in the BIOS as well. I'm not sure why you'd want to, unless you were hardcore overclocking, looking for specific, that's my fastest core, want it to run an absolute crazy amount. Yeah, I'm not. So it's definitely I think it's a hardcore overclocking thing to want to start disabling hyperthreading. I've always found it really useful in normal tasks and stuff at home. So yeah, that side of it is really complicated. It always is though, isn't it, Tom? Yes. So performance-wise, I've told you about 5.2, all cores for the overclock, and then I've also said to you about the stuff. Single-threaded on these was good. 5.3, at the end of the day, it's a 9900K core running at 5.3 gigahertz. So it's going to do quite well. 5.3 gigahertz would have been unheard of when we first got the 9900Ks, unless you had a cherry-picked one. So that side of it did really well. When you mix in multi-threads though, then it becomes a little bit more muddy, because the i9 fits right in and around the 3900X, which is, let's face facts, £100 cheaper. But then the other thing that you need to think about, and this is the Intel line, but This is 10-year-old architecture and there's only 10 cores. Theirs is new architecture and there's 16 cores. And in that, you know, there's a bit of argument there, but it's still £100 cheaper. And, you know, this is a whole new socket and you've got to buy a new motherboard and you've got to buy a new processor. Now, I know some people are now going, well, with AMD, you would have to buy a new motherboard, but you could have put a 3900X on an X370 board. Lovely upgrade that. Still going to be roughly around the same kind of performance as this. So, oh yeah, and the other thing is it's like they don't see it being a problem about the socket. It's what they kind of think about it now is like people are just going to buy, if you've had a system and you need to buy a new system, so that you've had one, let's say you've had your system for 4 years, that you're then going to buy into a brand new whole system now, so it runs a bit quicker. But what happens if you're on a 4-year-old Intel rig and you're technically going to end up buying what is a new processor, but underneath is pretty much the same architecture? At that point, wouldn't you think to yourself, well, if we're on the final legs of 14 nanometer now, but I need a processor, I need a system now, wouldn't it be better to invest in the newer stuff, which is technically AMD? Now, I'm not an AMD fanboy, I'm not an Intel fanboy, I'm a hardware fanboy, and I'm also a bit of a argumentative, let's debate about it fanboy. And there's a lot of areas about this that are actually kind of confusing for me. And this is when we need like a massive Zoom fest, us all to have a pint, be sat in the pub, and let's just chat about it, because that for me is what this platform brings. There is no clear cut yes answer, no answer. Gaming wise, graph pops up, it did all right, it genuinely did all right. Now I will say that the 9900K, well, most of the other results that are in that graph were retested when we did X570. So there's not like all the same RTX 2080 Ti drivers on that. But you can see that the old ones actually did quite well. And these new ones were tested literally last week. Now, the other thing that here we go. The other thing that you could say, and this is where some of the AMD fanboys are going to literally fall off the chair laughing, but maybe some of the gaming stuff doesn't work as well anymore because there's so many flaws and has been so many issues with all of the like hacks and stuff that you can get on the Intel platform. You know, the amount of times where there's one, oh yeah, they found a new fatal flaw with Intel, or someone can get in and do this within 3 seconds. So they've now had to do this, and now the processors are running 10% slower. Maybe that's the reason why the 9900K actually looks better then, because there's been so many things happen since that they now are not running quite as well. I don't know. And that is one of the reasons why I didn't go through and retest a load of them. Didn't get enough time in reality. Like, I'm filming this and I have had that CPU 7 days, and yeah, a lot of people think like you get it and it's like, yeah, brilliant, but the amount of time and effort that you actually have to go into running all the tests, different boards, new BIOSes turn up, you have to wipe the floor, start again, you know, it's fairly lengthy. But anyway, there's the old little jib in about the flaws and stuff. Hopefully it might be a little bit better with this one, but you're never going to know, are you? Until you've had it for 6 months and then it's running worse. So I've completely lost my train of thought now. So Blender-wise, multi-threaded stuff, it kicks in around the 3900X. The i5 kicks in around the 3600X. Which at this present moment in time you can buy for £200. So 275, 200. And when you go and have a look at the gaming for that as well, they're actually they're a lot closer than the i9 because of the boosts are different. So you're going to get a maximum boost on the i5 of 4.9, for example. I didn't say that before. Now, the one place where the Intel is stronger, like consistently stronger, other than gaming, is PC Mark 10. And that's meant to be like real world usage and stuff like that. And it didn't matter what board we were on or what BIOS we were on, they were always kind of there or thereabouts, smashing the top of the graph, which is kind of nice. So I've just realised that fan's not spinning. It's because I've not plugged it in at the bottom. What a DJ. Did you notice that one? Look. So my thoughts on Z490 are, it's really nice that we've got new connectivity. We've got Thunderbolt 3, we've got PCI, sorry, we haven't. We've got USB 3.2 Gen 2. So we've got a lot more connectivity going on around that. So the chipset side of things I like. The processor side of things, it's nice that they boost quicker. It's nice that, you know, at the end of the day, they've got so used to making 14 nanometer now because they can't make 10 properly yet, that they've got so used to it that we now, the yields are so good, they can consistently push these clocks. Amazing, wicked. You know, normal use, gaming, it's going to be brilliant. My problem though is the fact that we've quite clearly been given a new socket with an old tech for future tech. So the new socket is to bring in power and future I/O, which is quite clearly PCI Express 4, which these processors are lacking. So I think what in the grand scheme of things has happened is that the next gen of processors that will eventually go into this socket probably should have been here now. They've been quite clearly struggling with 10 nanometer for quite a while. What they've eventually done is, yes, all right, it wasn't like last week that they decided it, but at some point they went, well, what we'll do then is we'll just put the old cores on, which is basically Sandy Bridge. We'll put those on and we'll chuck a couple more cores on and we'll add some hyper-threading on just to kind of keep everyone happy, and we'll chuck it on that new socket, and then when the other lot is hopefully ready, if we can ever do it, then they'll go on that socket as well. When in reality, what I think they should have done is they should have saved this new socket for the new processors that we don't even know about yet, because we don't know whether they're ever going to be able to do 10 nanometer properly. I think what they should have done is they should have just given us these, the old socket, because I don't particularly think that it was like, you know, from a layman's point of view, looking at the power graphs and stuff like that, I think the old boards could have coped with it as well, you know, as well. Maybe we should have had Z490, yes, for the extra connectivity, old socket, so we got some upgradability sort of stuff going on. Maybe you could have bought a new processor, chucked it on your old Z390 board. That would have been lovely, wouldn't it? That sort of stuff, I think, should have happened. So we should have had the old socket, new chipset. Yes, we're going to get new motherboards, but it's going to give people options to be able to switch, change, and all of that sort of stuff. That is what should have happened. Bring us a whole new platform when the benefits of said platform are just not really there yet. Well, not even really there yet. They're not there yet. It actually makes me feel a bit sorry for the motherboard manufacturers when they've now got to try and do the best with what they've been given, and it, for want of a better term, it's a bit like polishing a turd. So the performance can be there, but I think it's just a bit unfair to the consumer to keep chucking these new sockets on us all the time and chucking a new socket on us when in reality the benefits are just not there. It could have been done on the old one. And if they say that it can't, I'm sure the boffins at Intel could have found a way around it. I think we could have had just a 9950K, for example, where it ran at 5.2 gigahertz out the box. We already had the 5 gigahertz one before, and then you could have had another SKU, the i9, and then you get what I'm trying to say. I'm actually kind of really frustrated with this. The i5, good little processor. It was a bit warmer than I thought it was going to be, actually. Overclocking for that, I just realised I didn't tell you. I struggled with the overclocking on that, if I'm honest. I ended up managing to get 4.9 across them. I'm not sure whether I've got a bad sample or something. It didn't do particularly well. So my thoughts with this are, it's going to come down to your thoughts at home. You know, if you want to go this way with your build, then I totally get it. Am I going to tell you that you should go to AMD? No, I'm not. I'm not going to tell you that you should, because to be honest with you, it's not a reviewer's place to tell you that you should buy one or the other. I'm just going to bombard you with information. We're going to have a good old chat about it like we have done, and then I'm going to let you make your own mind up. But you have to admit, with the price of the boards and the complete lack of PCI Express 4, it's a lot of money to pay for a completely new setup just for clock speed. So, I'll leave it with you. They do make quick cracking systems, and I've got a big pile of boards that, you know, they will all make lovely builds and stuff for people to be proud of. You're just going to have to decide whether you want to invest in this or whether you want to invest in the other side, because the problem is the competition is so very close now that there is no reason to just auto go one or the other. I mean, yes, they're going to scream about gameplay and all of that sort of stuff, and I would kind of agree. And this is going to be something that may make a lot of you at home kind of like breathe a sigh of relief. Yes, the Intel will definitely be quicker at gaming for a few frames per second. But if you were to stress the two of them out, like games aren't ever going to be completely saturated in 10 cores. That's 100%. And I think that this will easily be able to cope with streaming and stuff as well. But if you were going to be streaming on a budget where you're not wanting to spend £500 on a processor, if you maybe wanted to spend say 400, maybe 350 on a processor, you're actually going to get more cores going AMD. So if you're streaming on a budget, it kind of, you see what I mean about it muddying the waters? It's a very, very interesting time in technology. And there is no clear-cut answer for either, because clock speed is great, cores are great as well. Which way would you want to swing? Yeah. Should have been on the old platform. If it was on the old platform, it'd make this review a lot nicer. A lot nicer. So, no PCI Express 4. You do need some decent cooler for it. If you want to overclock, I'd say 360 AIO as an absolute kind of like baseline in reality. Sure, you can go 240, but you're going to run into temp problems. They do get flaky above 80 degrees as well. And the boards are all really quite expensive. So if you're going to end up buying one of these, you are going to spend some serious beer tokens. So I hope you've not spent too many of them during lockdown. Lots of like jangled, mixed up thoughts, because I don't script my reviews. I try to make them as honest and brain fart the information out as possible. I'd like to know your feedback underneath. I know there's a lot of people who are going to say that I've not said something because it was buried in another bit of the video, but I'm hoping that I've covered enough of it for you. This is going to be an absolute nightmare to edit graphs and stuff in, by the way. So yeah, really not enjoyed testing for this launch, and the thought of having all the other boards to do now is just like... But I will endeavour. There will be reviews going up on the website left, right and centre. On launch day, there is going to be a dedicated review going live for the Aorus Extreme and the MSI Godlike as well. Thank you for tuning in. If you if you got right the way to the end of the video, then post internet cookie in the comments and you will get some hearts. Thank you. This is Tiny Tom Logan. Out. Ding! But not because I like it, just because I haven't done it for a while. Love you, sis.